Imagine this. You're behind 100 millimeters of steel, and a massive 88 millimeter barrel is staring you right in the face. There's nowhere to run. But the American soldier never thought about running. While everyone else was terrified of the tiger, we were busy planning how to hunt it. June 1944. The muddy fields of Normandy played host to the world's most fearsome steel monsters, the German Tiger tanks. With their thick armor and lethal 88 millimeter guns, they were an immovable object for Allied forces and a living nightmare for American GIs. Every Tiger was worth 3 to 4 Sherman tanks. A battlefield encounter often meant a death warrant for American crews. But the American soldier never learned to bow down or accept the impossible. This is the epic of how we defeated a technologically superior enemy through grit, brains, and unshakable faith.
Friends, the story I'm telling you today isn't just about tank warfare. It's proof of how American ingenuity triumphs over raw, brutal force. On paper, the German Tigers were superior. We admit that. With 100 millimeters of frontal armor and that KWK-36 gun, they could take out most Allied tanks in a single shot. But we Americans don't just read the stats. We read the reality on the ground and the human factor. Our Shermans were faster, more agile, and we could build them by the thousands. Most importantly, the American soldiers inside those Shermans possessed an unbeatable spirit. This wasn't a war of technology. It was a war of wills.
In the weeks following D-Day, the dense hedgerows and narrow lanes of Normandy became a brutal arena for both Tiger and Sherman. The Germans tried to bleed the American advance dry with a Tiger waiting around every corner. But American crews had learned more than just how to drive a tank. They learned how to survive and win. Eyes peeled, radios buzzing, every crew member functioned as a vital part of the machine. They weren't just operating iron. They were the embodiment of intellect and courage in armored form.
Intelligence reports and post-war analysis showed just how high the fuel consumption and mechanical failure rates were for those Tigers. That heavy armor was a heavy burden. Meanwhile, our Shermans used less fuel, were easier to fix, and adapted faster to the terrain. This logistical edge was a massive part of closing the tactical gap. We Americans don't just win battles. We grind the enemy down until they have nothing left. That is a strategy far more effective than any tank shell.
During this period, American crews worked tirelessly to exploit the Tiger's weaknesses. Its front was impenetrable, but the side and rear armor could be pierced by the Sherman's 75 millimeter gun. Speed, maneuverability, and teamwork became the keys to the hunt. They decided they wouldn't be the prey. They would be the apex predators. This wasn't just a clash of metal. It was a manifesto of American brilliance.
This story shows exactly why the American soldier is the most feared force on Earth. It's not just about how a war was won. It's about a nation's spirit that refuses to break. In your opinion, what determines the fate of a war? Technology or the spirit of the soldier? Tell us in the comments. And if you don't want to miss these true American stories, subscribe and hit the bell. The saga continues.
By the second week in Normandy, American crews had developed their own lethal tactics to counter the Tiger threat. They no longer feared the beast. They looked for ways to kill it. Using the Wolfpack tactic, several Shermans would swarm a single Tiger, one drawing its fire from the front, while the others used their superior speed to deliver a killing blow to the flanks or rear. It was a masterpiece of teamwork over individual power.
These tactics weren't just born on the battlefield. They were products of our tank schools at Fort Knox and the strategists at the Pentagon. We Americans might not always build the biggest gun, but we damn sure know how to use the best one we've got. A Tiger's 80 millimeters could rip through a Sherman from 1,500 meters, while our 75 millimeter had to get within 500 meters to bite back. The only way to close that gap was through superior tactics, raw courage, and flawless coordination. That is engineering genius meeting the human soul.
Time and again, these Wolfpack tactics hit home. One Sherman would bravely draw the Tiger's attention, while two others sprinted for the flanks. As the Tiger's turret turned with agonizing slowness, the Sherman's agility took over. The mechanical whine of that turret became a funeral dirge for the German crews and a victory march for the Americans. They weren't just driving, they were outthinking the enemy.
The real secret behind these tactics was the training. Our tankers weren't just operators, they were soldiers capable of making independent decisions and taking the initiative on the fly. Against the rigid German chain of command, our flexible and adaptive nature gave us the upper hand in the chaos. Every member of a Sherman crew was a strategist in their own right. This proves that human power and intellect are sharper than any steel.
In this war, tanks were more than just machines. They were an extension of the human spirit. Every American crew entered the field like gladiators, putting their lives on the line for their country and freedom. They defeated the Tiger not just by piercing its armor, but by shattering its arrogance. It was proof that the American soldier will never back down and will always find a way.
In this episode, we saw how American military brilliance merged steel with intellect, but the Tiger's counterattacks and brutal power would put our Sherman crews to even tougher tests. In the next episode, we'll dive into the most intense Tiger encounters and explore the true limits of American courage. Stay tuned to the War Room Archives, because the real stories of heroism are just getting started.
July 1944. The dense hedgerows of the Normandy bocage were no longer just vegetation. They had become lethal death traps. The German Black Knights, the Tiger battalions, were dug in like iron fortresses to defend strategic villages. But the American army wouldn't be stopped. In this episode, we dive into the most intense firefights where American crews achieved the impossible against the raw power of the Tiger.
Friends, you won't find the real story of places like Villers-Bocage in military textbooks. Yes, Tiger tanks were masters of the ambush, but our boys didn't blink, even when staring down the throat of those massive 88mm guns. Do you know why? Because when we Americans hit a wall, we aren't trained to just climb over it. We're trained to tear it down. A Tiger's armor might be thick, but our resolve was a hell of a lot harder.
During the heavy fighting near St. Lo, a single Sherman crew found themselves nose to nose with two Tigers. The silence of a misty morning was shattered by the roar of Maybach engines. Retreat was an option, but they chose to fight. Using their headlights and engine noise to disorient the German crews in the fog, they turned a tank battle into a psychological war.
War isn't just about burning through ammo. It's about getting inside the enemy's head. That day, that crew moved faster than the Tiger's clumsy turret could traverse, dodging and weaving like a bullfighter around a confused beast. When that Sherman's 75mm gun barked, we witnessed a giant fall. This is American courage in its purest form. Technology only gets you so far. What wins the day is the heart inside the machine.
A war isn't won just on the front lines. It's won in the factories, the repair shops, and the supply chains. Tiger tanks might have been mechanical masterpieces, but they were also a maintenance nightmare. When a Tiger broke down, it took massive cranes and weeks of work to fix it. But a Sherman? The American industrial machine had built a system that could resurrect it right on the battlefield.
Look, the Germans spent 10 hours repairing for every 1 hour of fighting. Our system was built on continuity. If a Sherman's engine gave out, we could swap it for a fresh one in a matter of hours and have it back in the fight. We didn't just manufacture tanks. We manufactured a never-ending cycle of power. The Tiger was a legend, but the Sherman was a reality. And reality beats a legend every single time.
As every American unit pushed deeper into Normandy, they felt the weight of a massive logistical engine behind them. Thanks to parts standardization, a component from one Sherman fit perfectly into another. The Germans, meanwhile, had to wait for specialized parts for every individual Tiger. This was the greatest blow dealt by American industrial genius to Nazi elitism.
Logistics might sound like a boring word, but it's the real hero of this war. Our tankers knew that even if their rig took a hit, there was an entire army behind them ready to put them back on their feet. That confidence gave the American soldier an unshakable swagger. As we wrap up episode 4, remember this. Strength isn't about how much damage you deal in one hit. It's about how many hits you can take and still keep standing. In the next episode, we'll see how we broke the Tiger's final stand on the road to Berlin. Don't forget to subscribe. American power is everywhere.
August 1944. The marshes and narrow lanes of Normandy were left behind as Allied forces pushed deep into France, reaching the very doorstep of freedom. But the retreating German army hadn't played its most terrifying card yet. The Tiger tanks were no longer just weapons. They had become the symbol of Nazi Germany's final stand. For American tankers, the test was far from over. It was entering its bloodiest and most instructive phase. This is the story of how giants were toppled and how American strategy turned into a precision instrument.
Friends, everyone talks about the Tiger's terrifying 80mm gun, but no one talks about the desperation of the crew inside that beast. By the end of the summer of '44, the Tigers weren't the hunters anymore. They were wounded lions backed into a corner. We Americans didn't just hit them with shells. We hit them with speed and an endless line of supplies. A Tiger's frontal armor was still like a fortress. But if you can't knock down a fortress wall, you flank it and open the back door. That's exactly what we did.
On the road to Paris, during the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, American armored divisions encircled the German army. Tiger tanks attacked desperately to break the perimeter. But they weren't just facing Shermans anymore. They were up against a coordinated killing machine. Air support, artillery, and tank units moved as a single lethal fist.
This was the peak of our tactical superiority. When we spotted a Tiger, we didn't just rush into a duel, we hit the radios. Our P-47 Thunderbolts would scream overhead, and our howitzers would rain fire from the sky. The Germans believed in individual heroism and superweapons. We believed in the power of systems. A Tiger might knock out 3 Shermans, but a 4th one would inevitably get behind it. And inside that 4th Sherman was an American kid using his brains with one goal, getting back home. That's why we won, and they were buried in the dusty pages of history.
While German crews struggled with mechanical complexity and fuel shortages, American Shermans crossed rivers, plowed through mud, and pushed forward without stopping. While Tigers were being abandoned on the roads out of fuel, American logistics trucks were delivering fresh bread and ammunition to the very edge of the front. This wasn't just a tank war. It was a victory of civilization and industrial capacity.
The most important lesson we learned at this stage of the war was this: no armor is more protective than intelligence. No gun is more piercing than the belief in freedom. The cold, heavy steel of the Tiger melted away against the sharp, agile mind of the American soldier. We didn't just defeat an enemy. We destroyed a legend of fear. What do you think is your greatest weapon when facing an impossible obstacle? Courage or planning? Let's talk in the comments. In the next episode, I'll tell you how we stormed the gates of Berlin and hunted the last of the Tigers. Remember, history doesn't write about the cowards. It writes about those who show rational courage. Stay tuned to the War Room Archives.
As the snowy winter of 1944 arrived, the war was no longer fought just in the fields of Normandy. It was at the gates of the Third Reich, in the dark Ardennes forest, and finally in the ruined streets of Berlin. The Germans had deployed their last hope, the King Tiger, Tiger II. These massive machines, weighing nearly 70 tons with frontal armor that almost no shell could penetrate, were the final monsters designed to stop the Allied advance. But to the American soldier, these monsters were just one last obstacle to be broken.
Friends, when the Battle of the Bulge began, the sky was gray and the odds were completely against us. The Germans drove their King Tigers out of the snow like ghosts. Their 88s were spitting death in the freezing air. But they forgot one thing. Americans think better under pressure. They relied on their massive tanks. We relied on each other. The King Tiger was invincible on paper, but it was clumsy on icy roads. It collapsed bridges, and most importantly, it ran out of fuel against our stubborn defense.
The American Army employed an active defense strategy against the King Tigers. Tankers placed their rigs in hidden positions, waiting for the German giants to expose their thinner side armor. Destroying a King Tiger was like moving a mountain, but for a Sherman crew working in lockstep with American artillery and infantry, it was an engineering problem to be solved.
Look, the King Tiger was an engineering marvel, but a strategic failure. It was too heavy, too complex, and it arrived too late. Our Sherman Easy 8 models finally had better armor and those famous 76mm guns, but the real difference was that never-quit spirit of our crews. When we knocked out a Tiger, we weren't just destroying a tank. We were breaking the last hope of a tyranny. That winter, it wasn't just metal clashing against metal. It was the resolve of the free world clashing with the arrogance of a totalitarian regime. And as always, intellect and liberty prevailed.
In the final months of the war, Every American tank pushing into the heart of Germany was a harbinger of peace. The Tiger legend had turned into rusted piles of metal, out of fuel and abandoned by its crews. The American army was flowing toward Berlin like a flood. This was the absolute victory of logistics, tactics, and an unbreakable spirit.
As we reach the end of this journey, remember this: guns start wars, but people finish them. The Tiger tanks stand in museums today as a cautionary tale. Our Shermans, however, laid the foundation stones of a free world. The American soldier did the impossible and taught the world a lesson. When intelligence and courage unite, no armor can stop you. Thank you for sharing this epic with us. This has been the War Room Archives. I'll see you in the next heroic story from the dusty pages of history. For now, stay free.